Hello and welcome to another episode of So You Want to Make Comics. I am very honored to have a very special guest here today. He is most famous for his work on V for Vendetta with Alan Moore, also made into a feature film. But he's also the artist of Espers and many other titles, including the publisher of the online comics platform Aces Weekly, where you can read a lot of really fantastic stories by some of the industry's top writers and artists. David, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being on.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Chris, and it's good to be here.
Thank you. Well, okay, so I'm very curious about, I've had a couple of writers on the show, and I have yet to have an artist. So the artist perspective of creating comic books. I guess I want to kind of go back a little bit to when you first started drawing. What were your impressions of comic books at the time, and how did you get started?
Okay, well, you told me you have a lot of time, as long as I have a lot of time. I won't cut things short. I guess in terms of comics per se, comic books, my real interest, or comics rather than newspaper strips, because I grew up in England in the late 50s, and I saw lots of newspaper strips, which impressed me greatly. But I think they didn't impress me so much as make an impression on me that I wasn't too aware of at the time. But I think in terms of comics per se, it has to be, my beginnings really go to something called Boy's World, which was this very well produced and printed comic for kids that I saw when I was 12, 13, and that's about 63. So this is way back. And there was a big center spread in this comic called Wrath of the Gods, and it was centered around Greek mythology. So it had the Medusa and the Furies and all those sort of characters that Greek mythology is full of, these great, wonderful, inspiring, adventurous characters. And it centered around those, and it was drawn by this incredible British artist called Ronald Embleton. And Ronald Embleton was a fantastic draftsman as well as being a great comic storyteller. So basically that he produced something that was very convincing. It was something that was closer to a movie than any other comic I'd seen, and made me realize what you could do with comics. And when I saw that, I thought, well, if you can do this with comics, I want to try and do that. And so that really was my big inspiration. And then at around about that time, I saw Steve Ditko's work pre-Spider-Man in Amazing Adult Fantasy. And Steve Ditko was doing these incredibly atmospheric, like Twilight Zone stories for Stan Lee. And they were all incredible. And it was like those two inspirations really made me want to do comics. And then, so that meant from about 13 years old, I was doing comics because I loved them through school. And then, when I left school, I can go into a longer illustration of this, but I don't particularly want to. That's probably not going to help you. But in terms of comics, when I left school, I ended up training in advertising art. I was a messenger, T-boy, what you call in America a gopher in a studio in America. So I was learning advertising art, but through all that time when I was training as an advertising artist, I was doing comics in lunch hour, and I was also doing comics at home because I just loved that. I loved it. I loved telling those stories. And my viewpoint was it was like making a movie. You were making your own movie. This is like the great thing that any comic creator will tell you, is that you are in charge of everything. You're the props department. You're the director. You're the cinematographer. Everything. I mean, most comic creators see that connection with movies, and they respond to it. So that was one of the attractions too for me. And as I was doing that through the whole of my training in advertising art, and I realized that was such a strong suit for me as an artist. I really wanted to do that, and I really wanted to do that. So I ended up creating these newspaper strip characters that I sent to a European syndication agency, and I got this great letter back telling me, "Oh, wow, this is really good. We could use this stuff." On the strength of that, I left the art studio where I was working like an idiot, and just ditched the job without any kind of concern. And then a month later, I ended up figuring out that wasn't such a good invitation after all. And in fact, I got a letter from people who were sort of like running the agency that confirmed that viewpoint. So for the next 4 years, I spent time, improving my skills, sending off to different publishers, and at the same time doing part-time jobs that I was doing part-time jobs and honing my skills, and during that time sending to publishers. And then after a while, I got a break, and the rest is history.
Well, I'm very curious about, and I apologize, I don't know if you can hear the dog barking in the background.
Yeah, that's good. It's all good sound effects.
He's
right.
He's terrible. He's a little terror. But I'm curious, though, about the letter. You said they sent you a letter after the fact, after you left as a gopher? Was it?
Yeah, well, that was it. I got this very encouraging letter, first of all, when I sent off these newspaper strips. And I was very happy with what I'd done. One was a kind of James Bond type character called Jim Stryker. Another one was a kind of Conan character called Calgar. And I also created a character who was like a time traveler called Jim Jones. I won't tell you the other one. I won't go on. But anyway, the thing is, they were very good. I mean, I look back on them, they were pretty good. But the actual art involved in them wasn't good enough, I don't think. And it was realization of that made me think, well, I've just have to be better. And as I say, after trying to struggle with some illustration work to survive, I decided, well, look, I've got to improve my skills. So I took 2 different part-time jobs. Those part-time jobs were 3 days each, and then the remaining 4 days of that week I would study hard and become better. Because I just had to I had to realize that my art skills needed improving. My storytelling, well, I'm unashamed in being able to say to you that I was always a great storyteller. I have no shame in telling you that. It's that one skill that I knew I had, which comes from that flair that I'd recognized about my ability to tell comic stories. And so I knew I had that, but I did have to recognize that the needed artistic value of my work needed improving. So I just had to accept that fact and work hard to be better. And so it was a matter of studying, and then after a while, but as I say, I got a break, and this was '77. That was my first break. I did an annual. In England we have these gift annuals that they give kids. Well, you've got British heritage, so you know what I mean. In England, at Christmas you give annuals to kids that represent TV shows that they might got involved with, like Dukes of Hazzard or Fall Guy or stuff like that. and the one I did was Logan's Run. Logan's Run, they made a TV show of Logan's Run.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was given the annual of that, all the comic strips and all the illustrations in the Logan's Run Annual, and that was it. I mean, that I did a great job on that, and even now when I look back at the samples I did for that, it's good stuff. And the way the English comics market was in those days was that if you had good samples and you could take them from one comic to the other, then you got a job, you had a career, and that's exactly what happened. But I have to say that there was not much competition in English comics at that time. Um, this was before 2000 AD. 77 was actually when 2000 AD began. So before that, there were comics that were, you know, British comics that were doing the best they could, but there was not a massive amount of competition. So I entered the business when there wasn't that much competition, and I was in the right place at the right time, and I had good samples. And from '77, I just began, you know, just a whole career that carried on.
I mean, that sounds wonderful, and yeah, the point about not being as much competition, that certainly has changed in this day and age.
Oh
Um,
man,
it's and the interesting thing is that there's a flood of, like you said, you recognize that your original samples weren't as good as they could be, and you continue to work hard. I think there's kind of a trend now where a lot of people look at their artwork and they go, oh, this is good enough, or this is fine, or they don't play to their strengths. And so you are kind of wading through a flood of I'm gonna kill that dog. You are kind of going through a flood of kind of like I don't know how to say it. Like, there's good work in there, but there's a lot of kind of diminished quality because there's things that kind of just get filled in where it sounds like you were very ambitious. You wanted to turn in the best samples you possibly could every time, and if something didn't come back right, you worked at it.
well, I think it's about what your models are. I think with everybody in this business, if you're if your role models are very high, then you automatically do the best you can to try and reach them. I think if your role models are low, or you don't have that those people that you're trying to reach, then that's a different thing.
But yeah, I think there's definitely, I know in my work, and I'm not a comic book artist, but I definitely have a sense of, if I create something, I ask myself, if I hand this over to my role model, are they going to accept it, or are they going to kind of raise an eyebrow at me and go like, why are you bringing me this? So I always make sure that I'm not bringing them anything that, because it hurts when you hand something over to someone you admire and say, what do you think of this, and they just tear it to pieces. So you want to make sure that you're not walking away feeling like you disappointed them.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So again, I mean, the British comic atmosphere back then. I mean, I remember telling my grandmother in England that I was into comic books, and her and my uncle got together, and he, this is as a kid, he found some old Dan Dares that were in the kind of newspaper format, and she found a bunch of Beano comics, and that was pretty much all I ever got from them, which I appreciated. I wasn't big into Beano, but that was kind of what people's impression of comic books was over in Britain. It seemed like it was either Dan Dare or it was Beano. And you, along with some other great creators, you changed all that. I mean, like you said, 2000 AD came out, and what was that like? Was that a kind of did that feel like a breakthrough?
Yeah, 2000 AD was definitely a breakthrough, but I mean, I must say that I wasn't. There was I mean, if you talk about Dan Dare and Beano, you could actually put on the same level as, in the early 50s. That because Dan Dare, well, the first issue of the Eagle was 1950, and Dan and the Eagle lasted throughout the whole of the 50s and the 60s until a certain point, and then it got kind of devalued by mergers and stuff like that. It's what happened to a lot of British comics. A lot of British comics there were only, I mean, I don't know how much I need to go into this, but there were two British publishers of comics in England. One was a bunch called IPC, and another was a bunch called Thompson's, DC Thompson's, and there was a Scottish company. The Scottish company, DC Thompson's, produced the cheapest comics that you could buy. And it was all just thought of as like kid stuff, simple stuff. They produced a Beano, and IPC were producing other kinds of comics that were kind of anthologies, a whole mix of different comics that were anthologies, and anthology comics for boys and for girls. So they would have adventure, boys comics with very strong titles like Valiant and Knockout and Tiger and Lion, which were all full of adventure stories. And then they would have girls comics that were like Crystal and things like that, Bunty and things like this. But the thing is that they were all, it's a very simple product that was guided towards boys and girls, with nothing that was very radical or kind of different. It was all very simple. Jungle gym kind of stuff for the boys, and stories about ponies for girls. This was a very simple concept, and it crossed both IPC and DC Thompson. Now, 2000 AD out of that, because I don't know how that exactly happened, but 2000 AD, out of sheer accident, two people were involved in that comic, who were suddenly given their heads. I don't know how that happened. You have to go into the history of 2000 AD, and there are books written about this now that you can find. Pat Mills and Nick Landau were involved in this, and for some reason, IPC, the owners of 2000 AD, the publishers, gave those guys their heads. For some reason, I don't know. Somebody was taking their hand off the wheel. I don't know what was happening, but anyway, for some reason, the editors and the people responsible for the creative input of 2000 AD were given their heads, and they came out with this incredible thing that nobody really saw what they were doing. They created these very radical and tough characters, like Judge Dredd and some of the other more radical characters that were in 2000 AD. And the important thing to remember about 2000 AD is that with Pat Mills and those guys, is they were inspired by American TV and movies. Judge Dredd is like Clint Eastwood in outer space. That's kind of the concept. These guys who did 2000 AD very inspired by all that incredible stuff, and if they had had their heads, 2000 would not have happened, and I think a lot of us working in the business at the time were inspired by that. Not specifically 2000 AD, but we were all part of that same generation who wanted to change things. We grew up to all that simple, the simple anthology stuff of British comics. But we were inspired by American TV and movies, and we wanted to change that, So that 2008 was a turning point, and also, interestingly, 77 was the time when Star Wars was released too.
Yeah, Star Wars, and I'm sure 2001: A Space Odyssey before that, and then things kind of got cranking with science fiction again in movies, because you got, not soon after that, you got Alien, and then Blade Runner, going into the 80s. So, I imagine it was a really exciting time to be an artist and a creator. And what were the big things that were attracting you? Was science fiction really your thing?
Yeah, I was a big fan of science fiction from way back. I used to read when when I started reading, well, I only read fantasy and science fiction and horror when I was a teenager. That was all I read,
It's all
and
I read now. So
yeah,
I haven't changed.
I mean, yeah, I guess my classical education comes from TV. If I hadn't British TV, if I had not seen Shakespeare on British TV, and like Harold Pinter and Chekhov on British TV, I would know nothing about the classical elements of literature, or even music. I mean, British TV, uh, as you probably know, was once composed of just four channels, and I grew up with a great mix of entertainment, which was enlightening as well as entertaining, and I'm glad of that, because if I without casting aspersions on American television, you know for a long time you have lots of channels, which means that you can avoid any real I don't know, explorations into literature beyond what the four TV networks that used to be would give you. I mean, there's a whole history here that you can go back to, like NBC and ABC and CBS. We can go right back before cable, and then now what you've got with the way things are now. But there was a kind of, I think, the British system was, it gave you an opportunity of seeing things that otherwise you would never have seen or experienced. And I think that was a very good grounding. And I have to say that that part of the British experience of comic creators, what came from that? It came from that grounding of things that otherwise you would never have seen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's actually a big factor in my appreciation for any story created, is that it's a product of its time. And this is something that I have discussions with other people. Like the modern Star Wars movies are they're not hitting well with audiences. And one of my biggest things is like, well, you have to understand that Star Wars was a product of its time, and the place that it was created, and what was going on then. And as far as British television versus American television goes, I kind of had an interesting mix, because I moved to America as a kid. So I was a little kid getting things like The Young Ones, Monty Python and Benny Hill, along with snooker tournaments, and like you said, like shows about like a church. You get something about a church, or you would get some history of England. And then when I went to America, there was 13 channels at the time, one of which was PBS, which would actually get a lot of British imports. So you would get like a British Shakespearean drama that was brought over from the BBC. Or my favorite was there was an entire Sherlock Holmes series that was essentially, I forget the name of the actor, but I think he wanted to do everything.
Jeremy Brett?
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
And I thought those were fantastic. I think that, what are some of the creations that, I mean, obviously there's V for Vendetta, which you did with Alan Moore, which I have to wonder at this point, by the way, do you kind of get, I know V for Vendetta is your biggest claim to fame, but do you get tired of being asked about it? What are some projects that you're very proud of that you feel like you want to kind of bring into the spotlight a bit more?
Well, I never get tired of asking about V for Vendetta. It was great. It's a great creation. And not only is it a great story, it's an important story. And I go all over the world at the many events I'm invited to, luckily, and I'm made aware of how important it is to people and culturally. And I'm very proud of it, and I'm very proud to have been part of it. And I use it because it's a brand. It's your credentials. I use it as a brand. And as you know from anything you've seen of Aces Weekly, I always say it's from the guy who bought you V for Vendetta, because in fact, anything I do, anything I've done since V that I'm particularly proud of, I put that tag on, because it's if people know you do quality, then you should use that. It's insane not to. So I'm very proud of that. But I mean, my one disappointment, I think, from V has been Kickback. I did a great crime thriller, which I'm very proud of, called Kickback, which was not treated very well by the publishers in the US. I'm sorry about that, but I wish that had got more attention. It didn't get attention, and that's just one of the regrets of my career. But I did a good job on that, and it's still live, and it's in a digital version now through Sequential, and you can get it on Amazon Kindle.
Oh.
And yeah, so you can see it if despite the fact that the original publishers did not allow you to see it in the way that they should have. So but anything I've done beyond V, I don't have any problem with being seen as the creator of V, and mainly is that because it's a great work, and it gives you, as I say, it gives you a brand, and a brand is important to anybody. It's like if you create anything that makes it's like sometimes I always say, well, Sean Connery will always be James Bond, and that's true, and it's good to be James Bond, and so I have no problem with it.
Well, that's good, and I'm glad you say this, because I think this is kind of a thing that a lot of young people, not just young people, this is kind of a wall that I've come up against, is you have you want people to see your work and you want to make a living at your work, but yet as soon as you start bringing business into the equation and saying like, well, I've created this and this is how I'm going to sell it, everyone kind of starts cringing a little bit, like the act of wanting to sell and market your story is somehow should be beneath you. I'm not quite sure how to quantify it, but I know that I kind of get a lot of passive aggressive comments and stuff when I start talking about marketing. And for me, marketing is kind of part of the fun, creating something that people will get excited about and want to spend their hard-earned money on, because I mean, if they're anything like me, they don't have all the disposable income in the world, so they're very careful about what they purchase, what they read, what they watch, and so when something comes along and it's really exciting and you want to be a part of it, I think that's a thrilling experience. But
let me tell you something, because I think the future should be about creators actually taking responsibility for their own work, and social media gives us that chance. I think too many creators have had to rely on publishers, like I relied on a publisher who I trusted to market and promote my book. I mean, okay, I don't want to go into a big, like hate-filled, venom-filled kind of diatribe here about my situation. But when you produce a book after the movie of V for Vendetta comes out, mm-hmm. and it's released on the exact same month as the DVD of the movie that you're associated with comes out, and the publisher does nothing to promote you in that situation, that really hurts, and it really makes you feel that you're under the control of somebody who doesn't give a damn about your situation. They only care about about the publishing company. They don't care about you. And I think the future should be about creators really taking control of their work, and with social media we have that chance. We can do that. I mean, a lot of new creators are very smart about using social media,
Mm-hmm.
Instagram and stuff, and I want that to grow. Uh, Paper publishing is actually archaic. It's an archaic system. We don't need to print. We don't need to put stuff in boxes and send it around in trucks. We don't need to do that anymore because it's 21st century. We can change things. Creators can change things, and it will free us all. Um, it will free us from a kind of complete uh, captivity towards a system that is archaic. There's lots of great stories to be told out there in comics that can go straight from us to the screen, like directly.
I'm
We
finding
don't,
the thing that's also very important is readers. There's a lot of people out there that want good quality storytelling, not just in comics, but in movies at the moment. I see it. They're very passionate. They care very deeply. And when they're met by people who don't care, it's very frustrating for them. They feel like they're not being heard. So to hear you say that you've had experiences with publishers that don't care and don't care about your situation. I think that's a very important thing to show that you do care, because if you don't care, then why should your readers? So it's
well, absolutely, and it's like, and I think you have to recognise that it's a system that doesn't care. Really, I mean, I don't know how far you want to go with this, but you have a distribution system that is a monopoly here.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in regular comics now, you know any business is going to take advantage of a situation where they can be a monopoly, and I don't blame them. I mean, it's business, man.
Mm-hmm.
If you can charge the most you possibly can to distribute a comic, and you can, well, you do that because that's good business. You have shareholders. Why would you not do that? Okay, but that completely restricts the whole medium, because there's only so many ideas, only so many stories that can actually get through to the limited number of comic stores there are in the country. And it's like, we don't have the limit in cyberspace. It's like there is no limit in cyberspace, literally. And the only thing that is stopping us really making comics big in a major way is the comic reader's desire for a thing, and also the collectability. And they've got to bust out of that. You people have got to bust out of this need for a thing and be able to put it on a bookshelf and put it in a plastic bag, because there's a whole world of stories to be told by lots of great people you don't even know about. And a lot of these guys and girls are working on webcomics, in their bedrooms and stuff, doing these great ideas, and they're doing it for fun sometimes. Well, they're doing it for fun because there's nowhere else to go. But there's lots of people who want to tell great stories, and where do you go? And I mean, it's like, it's insane. We have 21st century. We can distribute all these great stories because we have screen. There's a screen. You don't have to screw with them. The other thing I was like, you don't have to put sound effects on them. I don't. I don't know what's happened to Madefire now. You heard about Madefire, that they were doing comics with sound effects and stuff like that. I don't know what they're doing now, but for me, comics is great the way it is. It's like comics, like panels on a screen. What do you need to do? You just put them on screen instead of on paper. We know how to tell stories great. We put it on screen instead of paper, and we put it down the superhighway, and there you go. And it's simple.
It's very interesting to me because I was the communities around comic books online. uh, they exist only as that community. They're not. You're right. They're not buying paper comics. As a matter of fact, paper comic sales are way down, and stores are. I don't know how they're doing in England, but in America, stores are closing at an alarming rate. And you get these communities that like they'll do like open source comics where they'll take comics that they love from the past and redraw them as something else, and everyone will do a page, and you'll get like thousands of people contributing. I just saw a thing, the entire saga, comic book saga, not the movie, comic book saga of Akira was redrawn by an entire community of fans. I mean, hundreds of people, maybe thousands. They each drew a different page in their own style, but they replaced the characters with The Simpsons. And it was like...
Well, that's weird. Why are they doing that?
I don't know. It's a weird phenomena, and they're not doing it for money. You can go and read it, but they've kind of hybridized. I'm not saying that right.
Hybridized.
Yeah.
Hybridized.
It doesn't sound right, but anyway.
Hybrid.
It's
hybrid copies. Hybrid. I'm sorry. Okay.
That's fine. No, but it was like because they took motifs from The Simpsons and they integrated them into Akira, so it almost takes on its own life. Because if people who know The Simpsons and they know Akira, it's this weird phenomena, and I don't quite understand it. But the point I'm making in just pointing it out is that people are creating comics, and there are communities around them that you're not even aware of the communities until somebody tells you about it, and then you look into it, and then you realize there's literally thousands of people who are into this on a regular basis. And that's just one example, but we also kind of live in a world where the digital information highway has created these spaces where there are things going on that the average person isn't aware of, but once you look, you find it's this huge thing that people are passionate about, and that can happen anywhere online.
Yeah, but the big problem with online is it's like it's not a market. It's just a playground.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's a problem, man. Everybody should everybody should be trying to make a market out of the internet, and not just a playground. I mean, because it's there. The market is there, and there's no reason why it can't sustain a market. And it's like, I don't know. I just when we began Aces Weekly, when I began Aces Weekly with my co-founder, we had this idea that all the comic readers out there, all the people who love comics out there, would come towards us and embrace us, because we were going to offer them a cheaper version of great comics, because the print costs, the distribution costs, all that stuff is enormous. If we can cut that out and still give them these great artists that they're familiar with in comics, that they read in paper comics, well, then it will come along and say, oh, this is like really great. But we didn't realize how much they needed that thing. They needed that thing so much that when we started, we had a whole bunch of readers who left us because they saw what we were doing, but they still needed that thing. They couldn't live without that thing. It's like an addiction. It really was an addiction. It's like heroin or something. Oh man, I've got to have it. I've got to have that. And even though you're promising these great artists, which we delivered, they still needed that need. They wanted that hit. And the more I went on, the more I realized that was something I had to just keep fighting. But that still is still a problem. And but if we could get past that, if we could if we could get past that need for the thing, for comics as a thing, and as the blend of story and art that it is, we would be in a fantastic world. You could open up things to an enormous audience, and that's what I'm still trying to deal with. And when I think about what you were talking about, what people are doing with Akira, and it's just people having fun. Well, it's almost like a waste where people are sort of like playing with things that have already been published, have already been paid for. They're just having fun with, when all that creativity could be involved in originating new stuff that will reach lots of people and make them a living. But until they release, reject this love for paper, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's actually been a kind of a resurgence of independent publishers who are going back to things like newsprint, and they're actually doing pretty well. I'd say that the one advantage for paper that I can think of at the moment is, it's when it comes to getting comic books into the hands of kids and kind of stoking the next generation of readers. It seems to be very hard to get them to, if you give them a website, they won't go to it. But if you put something in their hands that they can kind of open up and flip through and have, and maybe it ends up on the floor of their bedroom, but it's still there, it's still a presence. Whereas a website, it's harder to get people to go over to. So that's one thing that I think that is probably keeping people wanting paper. At least that's what I speculate. I know I've definitely put a lot of comic books into the hands of my kids, and they're on their phones. If I try and get them to look at something on their phone, even if it's a video on YouTube, I'm dad, trying to get them to look at something, and they're, whatever, dad, they're not interested in it. So that's the only thing that I can kind of immediately think of. But yeah, people do like collectability. I do know that I read things digitally all the time, and I read things through audio because I work a lot, and a lot of my work is visual, so I'm able to kind of, if somebody can read something to me while I'm working, that's a good thing. But what is your experience, with Aces Weekly as far as creating these stories that people can read, working with the artists? And have you found that the website has been able to kind of, I know you talked about some webcomics trying to make sound effects, which to me is, I don't understand why they would want to do that, because it's not why people read comics. They watch movies for that. But how is digital kind of changed the actual creation of the medium, if at all?
Well, the point is not to change it at all. It's just you just take it off paper and put it on screen. That's it. There's no point. That comics work the way they've been created. Decades they've worked in the way they were created to work. So you don't screw anything. You don't screw with them. You just put them on screen. And it's interesting what we said about Madefire. Well, Madefire, which is that company that did have sound effects and various animations, because I remember they started off in San Diego with a massive budget. They must have believed that was a successful concept. And there's been various other flirtations with playing with comics on screen. In Korea, there are comics that play with animation. I've seen them and look horrible, but they've been successful. So, my viewpoint is the same as you. I just think they're great the way they are. You just put them on screen, and that should be okay. But the resistance is extraordinary. It should be that if you offer them at a lower price, because you don't have those expenses involved with print and reproduction and blah blah blah. You should be able to maintain a very solid, support. But it's the collectability. I think the big thing in comics specifically, beyond the thing, as you said, you give your kid a paper and they grab it because it's still there, which is understandable. But that collectability is a big thing. I mean, if you look back to sort of like the 50s in America, when all the newsstands, all the comics were on newsstands, right? And it was part of mass readership. Comics are not mass readership anymore. Comics have lost that mass readership concept.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, from the minute they ended up in the comic stores, for all good reasons, I know, because of, what happened in the newsstands, blah, blah, blah. From the minute they ended up in comic stores, they became a niche. They became niche market. And then they became collectible. But nobody was really interested in collecting comics in the 50s when they were all on newsstands. And romance comics sold in their millions in the 50s on the newsstands. What a fantastic situation that is. Would even now. And it's like magazines, there's something like Life or something like, or more than Life, we've lost all that. And I think what I'm trying to get back, and I don't know how we will, but I want to get back that mass readership, and I think the internet could offer us that mass readership where you just dip in and grab it, I mean, it shouldn't have to be so difficult, really. The internet reaches everybody. We should be able to reach everybody and say, look, there's this, look at this is great, and try it and grab some, and if you want some more, here. But comics have still, even with the internet, they're still a niche. They've still somehow got lost in a niche market. Well, I go to anybody in the general public and saying comics, what do they think? Oh, superheroes, right? Superheroes or funny animals, and they probably don't even think about Snoopy anymore. It's not, because that's like a whole different world. It's like, that's a niche. It's become a niche, and you can't grab it out of the niche. It's like it's lost in the corner. It's lost in the corner. You try and pull it out, and you can't get it out. But how fantastic it will be for everybody. I'm in Aces Weekly. I get lots of submissions from people. Some great talent. The talent will not get published in the mainstream, but it's there. And it's there, and it tells an interesting and fascinating story. Where are these people going to go? Where are they going to go with this great talent? If we do not make the most of it, what's going to happen?
I think that there's so much to unpack in what you say, and I think it's definitely with the internet. The biggest challenge with the internet is that it's ever changing. It goes with trends, and there's so many different choices, and we have a culture in social media that tells stories through jokes and memes. You see these things trend, and then last year's memes are forgotten, and then there are new memes, new jokes, new trends, and they're stories, but they're not stories. They're kind of just the stories of what's going on the internet at the moment. And where I've seen people be successful with comics, is that they do get themselves kind of like a diehard core fan following that will go, if they're successful with it. They don't have a lot of fans. They may be dealing with just like 1,000 fans, but those 1,000 fans will buy anything that they do once they cultivate them. So that's kind of where I've seen some artists or creators be successful. It's not necessarily with worldwide audiences like you used to see with comic books, but they'll find their 1,000 fans and then kind of sustain what they're doing off of that. And then from there, every once in a while, one of those people will take off with something like Walking Dead. So I do think the audience is there. I think we just face new challenges with getting them to pay attention. Especially, like you said, people think comics, they think superheroes, which is fine. But now when people think superheroes, they think Marvel Cinematic Universe for the most part, which isn't comics. It's great that those movies are made and are being enjoyed, but when they go to look at the comics, they don't look like that. They look like something else. So, it's I can
but that's, you see, that's part of it. That's a kind of death knell for comics themselves, because the thing is, I mean, that used to be what sustained comics. That knowledge. Oh, well, superheroes. Well, that's it. If you want superheroes, you go to comics. Now they're moving to cinema. It's like there's nothing left of that core anymore for comics. And the sales of comics has not been improved in any significant way by the cinema.
Oh, they're worse than ever. They're absolutely worse than ever.
So where are you going? It's like it's like you've got to expand comics into a wider world, and the wider world is the internet. And I don't know how we do it, but it's such an extraordinary world of opportunity out there, and it's like being restricted. And it's talking about Aces Weekly. Our initial plan when we started Aces Weekly was like, well, all the comic readers, they love comics, so we just put them on screen and they'll just love them, and that's great. As I said to you, that was a kind of over-optimistic viewpoint, but that was the game plan. You start off with that because people, you've got people who love comics. They won't mind that it's on screen because it's still comics and it looks great, and you can put it in your smart TV and it looks even bigger and it's all brilliant, right? Okay. Once we've done that, once we've secured that base, we can go on and we can go through it, and we can tell people who've lost touch with comics and don't know how great they were, or maybe they read them when they was a kid and then they've lost touch with them, or they don't know how good they are, but you can get them through the internet and say, hey, try this, look, this is great, try this sample. But we've never been able to do that because we're spending still too much time trying to maximize what we have amongst comic readership. So, but really, that incredible world that you could reach, and it's global. I mean, we have global creators in Aces Weekly. We have people from Brazil, Spain, Italy, all creating for us.
Yeah,
and
tell us a bit about some of the titles. I would love to hear about, because you've got, how many titles do you have at the moment on the website?
Well, we have 40 volumes. We're up to 40 volumes.
Wow, that's a lot of content.
Yeah, and it's up to 150 pages for each one, because we have extras. The great thing about digital is you don't have to sort of like, if you're doing in print, every single page is going to cost you more money to print. Mm-hmm. But in digital, no problem at all. So we have extras. So, we have people, I can't be partisan and say, oh, this is really good, But if you go to the website, which, I don't have to advertise right now, but I'm sure you'll tag on at the end of your...
Yeah. Links will be in the description to everything, guaranteed.
Yeah. Okay, well, in that case, you just go to the website, you see, and go to buy, you'll see previous volumes, and it's full of incredible stuff from Argentina and Brazil and everything. It's all in English and blah, blah, blah. But we can reach out. The great thing about, we have a global cast, and we can reach out everywhere. I can sell to anybody. I mean, we're £1 a week. If you subscribe, it's £1 a week in any currency that PayPal will accept. That's £1 a week, and that gets you 20 pages, including extras. Right, that's like, you're not going to get that from anywhere, and you don't have to leave your couch. You just, it just comes to you every Monday evening, in 7 weekly parts, and then you get 150 pages, and it's just like,
Is it through the website, or is there an app for it as well?
No, it's a website. Well, look, we don't have an app. I'll tell you the reason why we never developed an app. Because an app, if you have an app, everybody thinks it's for your phone. So we never had that. We just have a website. You can bookmark it. I mean, it ain't rocket science. Just bookmark, the website, and you go to it. But an app is like, if I built an app for it, everybody would think it was for the phone, but it's not for the phone, because the phone is too small. We put great comics on the screen, so you can't have page by page. So phone's not good.
Well, it can still be read through a tablet, right? You can get it on.
Oh yeah, of course. Tablet, laptop, desktop, fine, but no phones. Although I am very interested in developing for phones. I think the comics I've seen on the phone, no good. I've seen some that developed and are supposed to be good, but they're no good. A phone is a very specific thing, and I really am interested in doing storytelling through comics on the phone, but it has to be really, really well thought out. So, but we're not for phones, and
I'm glad you mentioned that, though, because this is one of the things I'm constantly, like I said, I work in film, but I'm constantly looking at things and going, that wasn't executed so well, and they thought that it was, but and then you start thinking, what is it missing? What is the thing that would make me want it? So I am glad to hear that you're thinking about it in those terms. Like, it's not working now, but what is that clever solution that might make the experience just as good or worth the while? Because I know it is very important to you that the material is presented in the way that it's truly meant to be seen and not just glossed over with things. What is it like? I think somebody was just talking about some printing method that Marvel Comics had in the early 80s or late 70s that they had for about a year, and then they abandoned because they were just losing all the detail, and the artists were getting very mad, and it just wasn't any good. And so they changed it because they weren't delivering on what people were coming for. And not only that, I think it was Steve Ditko that said every comic is somebody's first comic.
Yeah.
And I think that's another challenge that we're facing at the moment, is that there's just a lot of comics right now within that monopoly that you were talking about. Because there's a monopoly, the quality of the product goes down. They're just kind of flooding the shelves, and it's hurting everyone. It's hurting the reputation of comics. So if somebody's first comic is a subpar comic, then you've had a reader lost for you without ever having a say.
Absolutely. Well, I entirely agree with that. It's I don't know. I mean, a lot of people come. Well, a lot of people come up to me at conventions with V for Vendetta, and they say this is the first. Somebody gave me to the this guy and said, you should read this. And it changed their entire viewpoint of comics. And yeah. Exactly. You've got to have that. You've got to have that first experience that really makes you appreciate, what you're seeing. So, if you don't have that, you're in trouble, really.
Now, with comics, I mean, obviously you're a comic reader yourself. What are aside from V for Vendetta and The Watchmen? I mean, these are kind of go-to comics. Pretty much, I would say. Alan Moore kind of almost has a monopoly on gateway comics. That Frank Miller has, a lot of people came in through Sin City or The Dark Knight Returns. What are some comics that you've read that, they may be older comics or they may be something recent, but what are some things you've read that you think, wow, if I could just put this into the hands of a new reader, this would definitely spark them?
Well, it has to go back to what I mentioned before, which is Wrath of the Gods, this incredible story that stimulated me. But I was the original Spider-Man and the original Fantastic Four were things that I was very enthusiastic about. I saw that stuff, and that was incredible. And I didn't collect all of Steve Ditko's Spider-Man or all of the original Fantastic Four, but that stuff is just incredible. It uses the medium in the best way it possibly can be for simple entertainment and good practice. I would never hold it up as a sort of like a paragon of what could be done in comics, because then that's like holding up, I don't know, John Carter of Mars as a paragon of fiction. It just is well done. It's just well done, classy, quality escapist entertainment, which should be done the way it was done, with incredible intellect and artistic skill. Um, but I the world of comics is incredibly wide. I mean, this is the great thing about comics. It's like, and there is something very sad about the fact that the individual countries of their viewpoint of comics, which is very small. And if you look at cinema, right? Mm-hmm. Cinema started off everywhere in the same kind of way, right? I mean, in America, you had the two-reelers, black hats and white hats. You had these simple westerns, right? Mm-hmm. It all started off exactly the same. And in one sense, it started off exactly the same in all countries of the world, right? Simple, two-reelers. Nobody knew anything about cinema. And they grew, and they found out. Now, you have cinema, which is a mature medium across continents, okay? So in France, they're more intellectual. In different countries, they have different qualities. But everybody knows cinema. Everybody knows cinema, and there is the sort of like the basic entertainment, and there's the blockbuster. But everybody knows cinema in one personality. That never happened in comics. Comics grew up in all kinds of crazy, distorted ways in all these different countries. So in France, it's got a completely different development and evolution. In America, it's completely different. In Japan, it's part of the whole cultural identity. So that you have golf comics. You have every kind of comic you possibly could, as well as everything entertaining everybody in any sorts of way, because it's part of the whole culture. It's as much of as part of mass entertainment in Japan as it is anything else. And then in Europe, you've got Spain and Italy, where you have where they're still on newsstands with Diabolic and Dylan Dog and all that sort of stuff. And then, but how strange it is that comics did not have that evolution. It all got distorted in different ways. But what a fantastic situation it would be if comics had had that evolution, that like film had graduated, had evolved and had grown up, so that everybody was part of this whole great storytelling medium. Because it's so fantastic and can do everything. But no, it didn't work out like that. So that's why we're in this strange situation of a strange evolution in all countries. And I think it's quite unusual. I don't think there's any other storytelling medium that's been like that. You can't say the same about fiction. You can't say the same about movies. You can't say the same about cinema or TV or anything. Because if you look at TV or other, it's still, it's graduated and it's changed and it's accepted. But comics somehow have been left in these little boxes where they've had restricted growth in some countries, maximum growth in other countries. It's very strange that that's happened.
Well, this is part of the reason why I started doing this particular segment for my YouTube channel is exploring the creation of comics, what their mechanics are. I mean, I'm sure anybody who's a big comic book fan has read Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics or Alan Moore's How to Write Comics. There's all sorts of mechanics to them, and people use them to tell all these different kinds of stories. And even though it's probably one of the pictures and words is one of the oldest forms of storytelling. The vocabulary of comic books is still fairly new. I think it's maybe only slightly older than cinema itself, but it's because it's so available. Anybody with the ability to put pen to paper and draw images has tried to kind of make it be the thing that they as an artist need it to be, where maybe cinema, because of its cost and the resources needed to produce it are so much greater, it probably forced it into a more stable model, because that was, they quickly learned, like, this is how we do it and not go broke, and this is how we produce something that audiences show up for, because the audience for a comic book is always one person, the person reading it. So it's not a gathering like going to the movies is, although television also changed that. So it's very interesting, and I don't have an answer, but I'm hoping to like many YouTubers who talk about comic books, get to the bottom of it. So I really am grateful and fascinated by your insights in creating Aces Weekly. I'm going to wrap up this segment of the show, but we're going to do the post show. And before we do, though, is there anything else that you would like to say?
No. except try Aces Weekly, and I know you take this onto you, but I just. Let me think. Is there something else I want to say?
It's not like you haven't said a lot, by the way, though. I mean,
no, I have. I have said a lot, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to ramble on. But I think if your audience is mainly of people who are sort of like in this particular, what we're talking about here with the comics world, are mainly hooked on paper, then I just, let me just appeal to them to really try and release themselves from it, because, we have the 21st century, and it gives us opportunities to reach out. And if you don't join that world, then you're kind of part of another world. You're part of a world that is like lost in the past, and all the worlds lost in the past, will eventually recognize the value of what the future offers. And so why wait? Why wait? Just take advantage of the value and what the future can offer you, and don't resist it for no reasonable reason. And I think that's all I can basically say here, really.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the time. So we're going to head over to the post show for my Patreon supporters. And don't forget to like this video, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and check out the links in the description to Aces Weekly, because I believe, David, you just released a new set of volumes of the latest books.
Yeah, volume 41 is out on the 26th of August.
Excellent. So that's 6 days from the recording of this show, which is the 20th, but I'm sure it'll probably be about 3 days by the time this comes out. Well, again, David, thank you very much, and thank you to all my listeners.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it, man. Bye-bye.